2785 Battle of Words. Astarion bowed faintly, as if showing the illustrious guest of the Immortal Flame Manor respect. Then, he straightened and gave Nefis a challenging look. She regarded him evenly, white sparks dancing in her eyes. The people gathered in the hall, meanwhile, all looked at him with burning intensity. Some seemed curious, while some were wary. None remained indifferent, though, focusing all their attention on the newly arrived Supreme. Astarion chuckled quietly. The purpose of this esteemed gathering, if I were so bold as to wager a guess, seems to be a discussion regarding none other than me. So, I've decided to save you all the trouble of having to wonder about my intentions, and come to dispel whatever doubts you might have. Walking forward, he gave the nearest guests a pleasant look. Is no one going to offer me a seat? An entire row of chairs in front of him instantly emptied, the people scrambling to get away. Astarion took a seat directly across the table from Nefis, crossed his legs, then straightened his robe and folded his hands neatly on his knee. Finally, he glanced up and gave her a friendly smile. That's better, isn't it? With the empty space around him and the wary gazes aimed at him, Astarion looked like he was being ostracized by the best and brightest of humanity, like he did not belong between these walls, or possibly anywhere at all. However, even if that sense of alienation bothered him, he did not let it show. Nefis studied him for a while. Then, a faint smile twisted her lips, as well. It is better, yes. With that, she took a seat, as well, leaning back to regard the deathly quiet hall. Hidden in the corridor behind the closed doors, Sunny paled. Crap, it would have been better if she had scowled, pursed her lips, or even set the table on fire. Then he would have known that Nefis was greatly dissatisfied. But that calm smile of hers was a far more frightening omen. It meant that she was prepared for battle. All the careful plans they had laid out could go up in flames if Nefis decided that there was no point in playing games with Astarion, especially not if he was the one making up the rules. Sunny turned to Cassie once more. Can you calm her down? Cassie raised an eyebrow. The entire problem is that she is too calm. What do you expect me to do? Sunny cursed quietly. For now, all he could do was wait and trust that Nefis would win the verbal battle against Astarion, or at least that she would care to win, as opposed to saying what she considered right, come what may. In the hall, Nefis spoke evenly. Welcome to the Immortal Flame Manor. The last time we saw each other here, I was what, 4, 5 years old. Time flies. Astarion let out a small sigh. Indeed, he remained silent for a moment, then glanced at the gathered guests. Why is everyone wearing such serious expressions? Oh, but I do have a guess. There is a question you all want to ask, but are scared to hear me answer. Isn't there? He leaned forward a little and asked in an insidious tone. Now that I am here, will there be a new domain war or not? Astarion remained motionless as dead silence settled in the great hall. Then, he leaned back and laughed suddenly. Goodness, please, lay down your worries. Nothing of the sort will happen. Not if I have anything to say about it, and definitely not by my command. After all, I am here to help. He smiled. The dream realm is already consuming parts of the waking world, and its profane masters are already stirring, lured by the scent of human souls. Humanity needs all the strength it can muster in order to survive the future, so, all I aspire to do is add to that strength. Astarion paused and glanced around the hall with an amused glint in his golden eyes. Ah, but this is exactly why the domain war happened, isn't it? My former comrades, Song and Vale, believed that 2 weak domains could not endure the burden of the future. Only one ultimate, absolute domain could, in the absence of spirits, naturally. That was why they ended up throwing humanity into the meat grinder of Godgrave. Misguided as they were, funnily enough, I share their belief. He shook his head. I have no intention of diminishing the power of humanity by dividing it between 2 domains. Even if I did, the idea of a second domain war is preposterous, don't you think? The first one was fought by 2 established supremes and their vast forces, after all, which happened to be of roughly equal size. Astarion raised his hands. I'll have only recently escaped the trap they had set for me. I am alone, without a follower, let alone military forces. Changing Star, meanwhile, rules a domain that spans 3 billion souls, fueled by every awakened in existence and all the citadels of the dream realm, the human domain. Her boundless power is fueled by all of mankind. How could I ever hope to wage war on her? He chuckled. That would be foolish. No, I too am in favor of having only a single domain encompassing all of humanity. Even that boy, Mordred, seems to understand absolute power. My guess is that he chose to retreat into the Hollow Mountains because building his strength by consuming nightmare creatures seemed like a better choice than competing with the immortal flame. I have no desire to desert mankind, though. So, I intend to stay and help defend the human domain. As Nephis watched silently, Astarion paused for a few seconds and then added in a concerned tone. As an outsider, I can see a few issues plaguing the human domain clearer than most, though. So, the first bit of help I want to provide is make a few things clear. After all, it seems like many of you have grown blind to the truth, or possibly had never known it at all. Meeting Neff's gaze, he smiled faintly and asked, almost as if by design, it is true that an absolute domain has a better chance of surviving the future. However, he turned to the guests of the Immortal Flame clan and raised an eyebrow faintly. Isn't it strange that none of you questioned if Changing Star was the best person to rule that domain? 2786 Will of a Tyrant. Hidden in the shadows beyond the hall, Sunny studied the reactions of the people gathered inside. He was concerned that they would be rattled by Astarion's question, but his worries turned out to be unfounded. If anything, the champions of the human domain seemed confused. Some of them were even offended, looking at the Dreamspawn with dark expressions. The rest, those who had known him and suffered at his hands in the past, regarded him with cold hostility. Nightwalker was simply staring at the man who had condemned him to the endless torment of the Eternal City silently, a murderous kind of calmness churning in his bright silver eyes. But, nonetheless, the question had been asked. And even if the people gathered in the Immortal Flame Manor disagreed with its implication, the seed of doubt had already been planted into their minds. How had Changing Star come to rule the world? She had inherited the heroic mantle of her storied family, true. She earned fame and renown with astonishing feats of her own, as well. Before the war, she was the only one who dared to voice her opposition to the militant stance of the sovereigns. During the war, she once again defied them by changing the course of the battle at Godheart and sparing countless soldiers from gruesome deaths. And finally, she rose in rebellion against the sovereigns and vanquished them by rising to the throne supremacy herself, thus ending the war. In the years since, she pushed humanity forward and guided it faithfully toward salvation, her fiery blade and her healing flames saving countless lives. Her reputation was stellar, and the story of her brilliant life was awe-inspiring. She was like a living goddess, igniting the hearts of mankind with hope and desire to live, struggle, and strive. But, there was also no denying the fact that, in large part, she had become the ruler of humanity simply by virtue of being the only one left standing at the end of the war. There were no supremes left to claim the throne, except for Changing Star. She had killed them all. Or rather, there had not been. There was the King of Nothing now. There was the Dreamspawn, as well. So wouldn't it only be reasonable to ask if one of them was more suited for the crown? Sunny could feel that, even if most champions of the human domain found the notion preposterous and distasteful, some did look at Nephis as if seeing her in a new light. Damn it, he studied them with a dark expression, wondering how she would react. Astarion seemed to be targeting her credibility, but what he was truly after was harming her image, harming that idea of Changing Star that existed in the minds of her subjects. So, if her answer was overly defensive or too aggressive, too callous or not firm enough, anything but flawless, he would succeed in dealing her a blow. And Sunny could easily imagine Neff giving a heated answer from beneath her usual mask of calm poise, thus helping Astarion achieve just that. After all, she could be quite arrogant at times. She cared little about weakness, expecting everyone to be as strong and willful as she was, or rather, caring only for those who aspired to be. And indeed, Nephis regarded Astarion with a cold expression for a while, doing her best to hide her smoldering wrath. Then, however, she did something that Sun Yu did not expect. Instead of answering the Dreamspawn, she turned her head slightly and looked at someone sitting on the western side of the vast round table. Saint Nightingale, would you be so kind? Kai, who had been there listening somberly, did not respond for a few moments. Then, he smiled slowly. Naturally, he regarded the champions of the human domain and said in a calm, clear voice. Every second word that man uttered was a lie. He's about as trustworthy as nightmare creature. Well, now that I think about it, most nightmare creatures are not very deceitful. So my comparison does them a disservice. A wave of subdued whispers spread among the gathered guests. Nightwalker, meanwhile, did not hold himself back and scoffed loudly. Sunny could not help but smile. If there was one person whose reputation was even more stellar than Changing Stars, it was Nightingale, Saint Kai, the Dragonslayer. There was literally no one who had anything bad to say about the man, despite the fact that he had conquered Ravenheart and ensured the fall of the great clan Song. That was because, amazingly enough, he had managed to achieve that breathtaking feat without spilling a single drop of blood. Not only was he universally admired and beloved, but he also enjoyed the immense trust of both his peers and the general population. He did not make a secret out of his flaw, after all, so everyone knew that Nightingale could tell lies from the truth. So, by calling upon him, Nephis both drew everyone's attention away from Astarion's question and dealt a grievous wound to his credibility, with a single sentence, no less. Instead of searching for a way to deflect the attack, she simply ignored it completely and delivered one of her own. It was honestly beautifully done. Sunny felt proud. In the Great Hall, the wary and confused looks aimed at Astarion were quickly turning hostile. Subjected to that hostility, he laughed. Oh, my, it seems that I've been caught red-handed. How embarrassing. Well then, fine. I'll admit that I wasn't entirely forthcoming. Looking around the hall with a humorous smile, he shrugged. I can see how you would not trust anything I say henceforth, which would be troublesome, to be entirely honest. How about this, then? From now on, I solemnly swear to speak the truth, only the truth, and nothing but the truth. Esteemed Saint Nightingale can be my witness. He looked at Kai, as if challenging him to claim that this promise was untrue, as well. Kai frowned, but remained silent. Hidden in the shadows, Sunny frowned. He did not miss that Astarion replaced the whole truth with only the truth, which was a subtle but important distinction. As someone who often spoke in half-truths and lied by omission, Sunny knew better than most how important it was. Astarion's smile, meanwhile, widened for a moment before becoming dim. He sighed. There are so many distinguished warriors and true leaders in this room. The great pillars of the first and second generations, those who built the world we live in with their own blood, sweat, and tears. Seasoned veterans of the nightmare spell who carry the immense weight of their vast experience with dignity and poise. How is it, then, that an inexperienced girl from the third generation is allowed to decide the fate of humanity unilaterally, without heeding anyone's wisdom or advice? He shook his head with a hint of dejection. The answer, of course, is simple. It is because she is supreme, and you are not. She rules simply because she is stronger, because no one can oppose her will. However, a person whose authority is founded only in strength is not a ruler. Astarion frowned, then said in a grave tone. Such Ro Urson is nothing but a tyrant. As his words echoed in the vast hall, he looked around and asked. You seem to regard Changing Star as some kind of savior, but have you all forgotten that her true name has a different meaning as well? The ruinous star, the star of misfortune. As his eyes hardened, Astarion gazed directly at Nephis. The Star of Ruin, 2787 Smear Campaign. Nephis and Astarion had exchanged blows, but these first attacks were merely meant to probe the opponent's defenses. Now that they had tested the waters, the real clash was about to begin. The Star of Ruin. Astarion's word hung in the air, causing some of the gathered champions to glance furtively at Nephis. She did not show any particular reaction, though, simply continuing to look at Astarion evenly. In the silence, one of the guests, a saint of the fourth generation, spoke in an indignant tone. You are going too far, Lord Astarion. Lady Nephs has never been anything but a stellar example of what awakened are meant to be. A few others grumbled in solidarity. You have a peculiar definition of tyranny, my lord. Possessing strength and only possessing strength are not at all the same thing. Our Lady might be younger than some, but her accomplishments speak for themselves. Astarion lingered for a moment, then turned to look at the last person to speak. Oh, and what are her accomplishments, exactly? Tell me, please, I am quite an accomplished man myself, after all. I was among the first awakened to ever become saints. I was among those who first became supreme, as well. While the Star of Ruin did, what? Conquered the second nightmare as a sleeper. Attained supremacy while escaping the dangers of the nightmare spell. Both are impressive feats, no doubt. But why does it sound like she simply did something that someone else had already done, just in a flashier manner? The person scoffed. Ridiculous. Another rose from their seat. What are you even talking about? From the very start, Lady Nephis has been a beacon of hope for humans. Even as a sleeper on the Forgotten Shore, she was already a champion and a savior. Nephis did not even need to say anything, because her silence spoke louder than words. The people of her domain were burning with an ardent desire to defend her honor, anyway. But Sunny suddenly felt an ominous premonition. Something is not quite right. In the spacious hall, Astarion smiled faintly. Then, he tilted his head a little. The Forgotten Shore. Ah, I've heard all about her accomplishments there. He glanced at Nefis, his expression turning concerned. From what I hear, more than 1,000 sleepers resided on the Forgotten Shore when she arrived. But by the time she was done with them, barely 100 had survived the slaughter. Astarion turned suddenly to Kai. Tell me, Saint Nightingale. Am I lying? Not receiving an answer, he sighed. A savior. Well, possibly, then again, possibly she simply used the corpses of those poor children to pave a path to salvation for herself. It was just that she failed to walk it, in the end. Who's to say? Astarion shook his head. Ah, but it doesn't really matter if she callously indoctrinated them into becoming sacrificial lambs, does it? What matters is the result of her radiant leadership. A mere 100, a survival rate of less than 10%, it's difficult to call that a resounding success, I'd say. Sunny pursed his lips. Astarion was painting a bleak picture, but he wasn't really lying. In fact, he was mostly telling the truth. Suddenly, a disturbing suspicion took root in Sunny's mind. Astarion, meanwhile, squinted a little. If this is your definition of a savior, then how many people do you expect to survive the dire future under her banner, exactly? Humanity is 3 billion souls strong, at the moment. So, 300 million, at best. Not even that, while billions more will be condemned to die. He chuckled suddenly. Come to think about it, these figures are quite in line with what Vale and Song had in mind. They wanted to shelter a couple of 100 million people here in the Dream Realm while leaving the rest of humanity to die. Makes one wonder what the point of overthrowing them even was. Nefis studied him calmly. The fire keepers stationed in the hall, however, seemed to be boiling with rage. Finally, she exhaled slowly and spoke. Comparing me to Anvil and Ki Song, and yourself, for that matter, is quite misguided. There is a fundamental distinction between us, after all. That distinction is that they capitulated before the nightmare spell, while I never did. From the days I spent on the Forgotten Shore until today, my resolve to defeat it has never wavered. I have always endeavored to support and inspire others to fight valiantly against it, as well. She gestured to the champions of the human domain gathered in the hall. Look around you, Dreamspawn. Every single person here is someone who has overcome their fear and raised their sword in defiance of the world that seeks to destroy them. There are more still who fought courageously, but perished in the fight. Their deaths are a cause for sorrow, but they have never been meaningless. Because there is no purpose nobler or more glorious. Hearing her words, the champions of the human domain straightened. Some seemed proud to hear her praise, others looked mournful, remembering the friends they had lost on the path of ascension. Nefis smiled faintly. It was so on the Forgotten Shore, as well. Yes, more than 1,000 sleepers existed in the Dark City once. Rotting slowly as they were being ground to dust by the Dream Realm. They had no hope and no future, quietly awaiting their meaningless ends. But yes, indeed, I was not their savior. I was merely the person who showed them a way to save themselves, or die proudly, with a sword in their hands, instead of dying senselessly on their knees. In the corridor beyond the hall, Cassie suddenly flinched and paled. Sunny, who was busy with his own thoughts, glanced at her and raised an eyebrow. What is the matter? Cassie shook her head. It's nothing. Just, Nefis wants me to join her inside. She remained motionless for a moment, then raised a hand and put it on the door handle. Her hand trembled a little. Sunny studied Cassie somberly. It was peculiar to see her in such a state, but he belatedly understood the reason. By entering the hall, Cassie would be facing Astarion for the first time since he brutalized her during the ambush. Her mind was immensely strong, but the body had a way of remembering trauma. Sunny wanted to say something, but held himself back. Cassie had her pride, as well. She did not need his pity, only his support. Exhaling slowly, Cassie opened the door and entered the hall. She walked toward Nef's chair with confident steps and stopped behind it. Nefis did not turn around. Instead, she glanced at Astarion and continued calmly. That said, those who did survive by following me to the Crimson Spire, the valiant men and women whom you besmirched by calling them sacrificial lambs, still follow me to this day. The Fire Keepers are here. The members of my cohort are here, as well. Song of the Fallen, Nightingale, raised by Wolver, Sol Reaper Jet. Her gaze turned cold. A member of my cohort has never died. They are all still alive, serving humanity as some of its most fearsome warriors. That is a 100% survival rate, Dreamspawn. In that regard, what do you have to say for yourself? How many members of your own cohort still live? Neff's expression followed her gaze. Her even voice resounded in the vast hall, spreading far and wide even though she was not speaking that loudly. Smile of heaven, broken sword, iron heart, Ravensong, everyone who has ever relied on you as a comrade is dead. So, do you really want to lecture me about results? Astarion grinned, and at that moment, Sunny finally realized what his plan was. His eyes widened a little. That bastard, 2788 Truth Blade. The vague suspicion Sunny felt when Astarion easily guessed the true story of what had happened on the Forgotten Shore, while painting it with an uncharitable brush, naturally of course, became a certainty now. That bastard. Left alone in the dark corridor, Sunny gritted his teeth. Astarion lied as easily as he breathed, so they had prepared to match his offense with their own deception. Sunny and Cassie had worked quite hard to come up with the best strategy to keep the human domain as resistant to his plague as possible. The web of deceit they had woven was intricate and vast. However, the Dreamspawn chose a different weapon to make them bleed today. He chose to wield the sharpest blade there was. He chose the truth. Damnation. There were plenty of truths that could hurt the cohesion of the human domain. Neffy's was not at all the icon of virtue and nobility that the masses believed her to be, after all. She had committed plenty of morally questionable acts, and so had her most trusted subordinates. Depending on how much Astarion knew, the results of revealing the truth could be gravely damaging. That was why he had not seemed bothered when Neffys used Kai to discredit him. Because that had been Astarion's goal all along, to involve Nightingale in the conversation and thus hone his blade to cut them even deeper. He had played them well. There was only one truth Astarion was not going to reveal, the fact that the Lord of Shadows had never died, and was quietly supporting the radiant goddess of humanity from the darkness. That was because Astarion's goal was to weaken and compromise the public's confidence in the human domain. Admitting that there was a second supreme protecting it from the shadows could cause some backlash at first, but eventually, it would just serve to show that the human domain was secretly twice as strong as people believed. Naturally, that went against Astarion's goal. He did not seem to know that Sunny carried Weaver's blood in his veins instead of that of Shadow God, yet, but even without that knowledge, revealing Sunny's existence could only do him harm. Every other truth was fair play, though. Sunny sent Cassie a mental message to share his suspicion. At the same time, he feverishly considered what particular secrets the Dreamspawn could reveal to deal them a painful blow. In the meantime, Astarion sighed. My former comrades are indeed all dead. You killed some of them yourself, didn't you, Neffys? It must have been difficult. He looked around the hall, his golden eyes gleaming with a mysterious light. It is quite a heartbreaking story, don't you think? A girl who was orphaned young survives the horrors of the dream realm, becomes a master, and finds a new family as an adopted daughter of her late father's friend, the king, only to be forced to rebel against the king and destroy her new family with her own hands. Astarion faced Neffys once again and smiled. Of course, there is a different story as well, equally as heartbreaking but far more sinister. It is the story of an orphan girl who survived the horrors of the dream realm out of pure hatred and spite, warmed her way into the royal family, gained the trust of her adopted father, the king, and then conspired to kill him and take his crown as her own. One of the champions of the human realm could not hold back his outrage and raised his voice. How dare you? Astarion smiled. Ah, there are so many lies obscuring the true shape of the world. Some of you have never even glimpsed the truth. Others. He glanced at Wake of Ruin and several other members of the older generations. Others know it too well, since they were complicit in burying the truth. Well, let me shine a light on a few things and reveal the truth for everyone to see. Saint Nightingale, you will be my witness, won't you? Kai gritted his teeth, prompting Astarion to chuckle. Many of you seem to be under an illusion that Star of Ruin only rebelled against the great clans because she could not endure the madness of their war anymore. But, in fact, killing the original sovereigns and usurping their thrones had always been her goal. The champions of the human domain looked at him with dark, hostile expressions. What reason could she have had? Astarion chuckled. Why, it was to avenge her clan, of course. Neff's expression turned darker, and a wave of stunned whispers rushed across the hall. Astarion sighed and shook his head. What, did you think that the illustrious Immortal Flame clan just flicked Kappa Erd out of existence all on its own? No, naturally not. In fact, it was methodically destroyed by the very people who used to fight side by side with Broken Sword and Smile of Heaven. His expression turned somber. Since we are already talking about it, let me reveal a small truth to those who are too young to have known it already. Anvil, Ki Song, and I. We did not challenge the fourth nightmare because of the chain of nightmares. In fact, we conquered the fourth nightmare almost 2 decades before the chain of nightmares even started. And it wasn't just the 3 of us, either. Broken Sword was with us too. He was the one who had led us into the nightmare, in the first place. A hum of stunned voices rose from the gathered guests. Astarion smiled darkly. It is just that the same 2 people who imprisoned me had killed him immediately after the conclusion of the nightmare. Then, they dismantled the Immortal Flame clan and hid in the shadows, pulling the strings of humanity as they saw fit. That is why the woman you call Changing Star was raised and nurtured not by benevolence and noble intentions but by malice and hatred instead. That is what the white flames you call pure are fueled by. He chuckled. She never intended to be a princess of valor. She never failed to endure the suffering caused by the war. Instead, she bent the knee in front of her father's killer, served him faithfully to bide her time, and hit at the last possible moment, not because the war was taking too heavy a toll on humanity, but simply because that was when he was at his weakest. That was when she had the highest chance to succeed. She and the sellsword saint she subjugated, used, and then killed. Saying those words, he looked at Nephis. Am I wrong, Star of Ruin? A dead silence settled in the vast hall. The gazes that had been focused on Astarion now all turned to Nephis, gleaming with a chaotic mixture of emotions. Paying them no heed, Nephis studied Astarion for a short while, and then tilted her head a little. His voice sounded even. So, what you are trying to say is, nicely done. As Astarion raised an eyebrow, she continued with a faint smile. That is to say, if I were indeed as determined and diabolical as you insinuated, wouldn't that make me only more powerful, dangerous, and effective at achieving my goals than everyone assumed? An orphan girl from a fallen clan growing up to bring down 2 of the most powerful rulers in the world and usurp their domains, from planning to execution, she must be quite brilliant. Wouldn't people feel better knowing that someone like that is leading them through the era of the nightmare spell? She chuckled quietly. Look, Astarion. The champions of the human domain were all gazing at her. Their eyes were not brimming with shock and revulsion, though. Instead, they were full of respect, awe, and wary admiration. Nephis smiled. Yes, the sovereigns killed my father and ruined my clan. Yes, I hated them and wanted to avenge myself upon them. And yes, I prepared for a long time to take them down. However, you are twisting the truth, as always. Destroying the great clans has never been my goal. My goal has always been to conquer the nightmare spell. That is the true reason I resisted the war and rebelled against the sovereigns in Godgrave. It was because their complacency, callousness, and inaction were harming humanity's chances of making it through the jaws of the spell. And I wanted humanity to survive. The champions of the human domain listened to her with intense attention. None of them had been swayed by Astarion's argument. If anything, many of them seemed more enraptured by the idea of Changing Star than ever before. Sunny could understand why. The true story of Nephis, while not as glossy and clean as what everyone believed, was nevertheless far more poignant and engaging. It was difficult to relate to perfection, after all. But all people loved a flawed hero and a twisted story of tragedy, betrayal, and vengeance. That was why Changing Star's claim of being the best person to lead humanity to salvation rooted itself only deeper in their hearts. However, Astarion simply smiled, as if he had gotten what he wanted. He remained silent for a few moments, then leaned forward and asked in an insidious tone, "But not all of humanity, right?" Hidden in the shadows, Sunny paled.